Welcome to the Stray Pointers podcast, where seemingly ordinary people join us for extraordinary discussions. You're listening to Season 2, Episode 16 of the Stray Pointers podcast. This episode was recorded on October 25th, 2024. I'm your host, Jim Lullis. For more information about the show, including the show notes for this episode, please visit straypointers.com. Joining the show today are two Omaha metro area software engineers, Juan Vazquez and Cameron Cunning. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
I asked Juan and Cameron to join me to discuss the Advent of Code, which is an annual Christmas-themed programming competition that has daily challenges. The competition runs from December 1st through December 25th, kind of in the vein of an Advent calendar. The competition is hosted on a website. Began in 2015 was the first one, and there are basically two puzzles issued each day, starting at midnight Eastern time, and you get the questions for the puzzle, the first puzzle immediately, and you have to solve that puzzle before you can get the second puzzle. So ultimately, what you end up doing if you go through the whole competition is you end up solving 50 puzzles throughout the path from December 1st to Christmas. So guys, I know that the three of us have participated in the last couple of these to varying degrees. I usually drop out in the first week. I get frustrated with the problems themselves, the language I have chosen, and that sort of thing. And I don't really keep up with it after that. I'm gonna try to do better this year. Do you guys remember any particular competition that stands out well, first of all, how did you guys get started in joining and participating in the competition? Juan?
Geez, I started from the first, so 2015. I was looking through my own Git repo here, and I think at that time, I think Twitter was still feeling pretty new at the time, and so a lot of what the interaction I was having with the dev community was seeing what people were doing there, and I think I saw it through a tweet at the time that there was this puzzle, days of puzzles, and I had been doing puzzles before that. There's this site, I think you pronounce it Euler, Project Euler, and I had done a few of those, and I really liked it. It was really trying to push myself on solving problems algorithm. I'm gonna stumble over my words here. Using algorithms to solve things and just better myself in the software engineering space. And so I believe my first interaction with that was through a tweet I saw by one of the folks I was following at the time.
Yeah, and I think I started probably around 2020. 2020 is the first one that I see in my GitHub repo. I might have done one or two before that, but I'm sure I saw it on Hacker News, and kind of like Juan, I've kind of always enjoyed doing these sorts of things. I did Project Euler, and there's exorcism.org that has similar exercises, and I think Code Wars is another one. And I also did a little bit of competitive programming in college. So I've always kind of liked doing these sorts of little challenges.
Okay. I think mine was the 2020 competition, Cameron, and I think you were part of the reason that I participated in that, because a fellow developer at work was asking me questions about one of the puzzles and how they could solve it with PowerShell. They were using the non-Windows version of PowerShell to try to go through the competition. And as I was helping them solve the problem, it seemed kind of fun. So I knew what the competition was. I'd seen it on Hacker News as well. I just had never really was never really been bitten by the bug to try it out until then. So 2020 was probably my first competition. And I was looking online today and I saw that 2020 seemed to be kind of a jumping on point for a lot of folks. And there's speculation that that was because of the pandemic, that so many folks were, not really going anywhere, not going out to Christmas shop or to family gatherings or things like that. They just had some more time on their hands. So tell me a little bit then about the programming languages that you guys have used.
Well, I looked back and I think I did my first one in Ruby, and then I tried C++, plus plus, and then I tried one in C sharp, and then I tried one in Rust.
And do you use the competition as a vehicle to learn more about these languages, or what's the reasoning on why you chose the given language in each competition?
Right, yeah, I try to use it to get more comfortable in whatever language I'm, looking to get more comfortable in at the moment.
And did that work?
Oh, definitely.
Your last one was in Rust.
It was, yeah.
I'm curious as to how you fared in that because Rust can be kind of a terse language to learn until you've learned it. It's kind of an uphill climb, I'm told.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of tricky. And I didn't make it through that whole competition either. I usually get burned out after about 10 days. Um, but it wasn't due to anything with the Rust language itself. I kind of feel guilty, with how much stuff I have to look up, but then I have to remind myself, oh, you don't know the language, so you've got to look it up. Don't feel bad for looking it up. But yeah, it's a lot of looking up simple stuff like, how to add stuff to an array,
Hmm.
etc. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, it's a great way to learn the language.
Yeah, I'm just kind of scanning through over the years what I've used. I did so when in 2015 I was still pretty in deep with using Groovy. So I did a number of solutions with Groovy. So wasn't necessarily needing to learn that language as much because I was pretty proficient at the time. But then I saw mid competition, I switched over to Clojure, and I certainly was using the questions to learn Clojure. So it took me a long time. That 2015 was the first year that I completed, but it actually spans maybe I feel like maybe it was a decade between when I started it and when I went back and finished it. Uh, well, the puzzle creator I'm forgetting the name right now had a tweet years ago that of how many people actually completed a year, and I had gotten through to about day 22, 20, I think, on 2015, and so I went back and spent I don't remember a couple of weeks trying to solve some of the challenges through looking things up and doing those just learning. So
Sure.
it really did force me to learn corners of the languages and how I could interact with the Java ecosystem with Clojure. Because up to that point, I had been I'd say playing with Clojure and doing some things, but I was all within the Clojure ecosystem, and then gradually started to find libraries and really the power of that language and the DSLs that existed for it. So Clojure's in there. TypeScript is in there in my repository, and then Elixir is the latest one. Um, Within Clojure, you can do some things like mini conron. I think that's how I would pronounce it. It's kind of a logic constraint programming. So I've used that within Clojure on some of the puzzles. Core Logic is the other one. Or sorry, mini conron is Clojure's package library is Core Logic, and I used that for a challenge, and it was learning within the learning, just a new paradigm within the functional programming paradigm. And there's a really nice language mini. We can kind of create your own language. Instaparse was one I used where um, I believe I created a language within the language using that. So that was fun. So it kind of spidered out from doing it all within the language and then doing it with different methodologies or patterns out there within the same language. So it's been a fun ride. But
I'm
yeah.
curious. I'm curious how that effort, um, how that, how that, how you fared using that approach because a couple of years ago there was a lot of publicity around the gent. He has a GitHub repository under the ID Betaveros, Betaveros, and he created his own language to use in the competition. The guy that always takes the first spot in the leaderboard, or usually does take the first spot in the leaderboard, he had created his own programming language written in Rust so that he could solve these puzzles. And I thought it was very interesting as the Hacker News community was looking into the other leaderboard members, they saw that a good three-quarters of the folks on the leaderboard were using their own domain-specific languages to attack these problems. So they, I don't stick with the competition enough to, I guess, understand the patterns, but I guess these guys probably saw repetition in these and built their own languages around them. So did your efforts to kind of build a custom language, was that fruitful?
So I have my perspective is a little bit different on where they were doing it. I was doing it in relation to the story that was given. So a lot of times the story will be like this, will say something to the effect of, here are the instructions that such and such module needs in order to give this output as part of the story itself. And so they'll give you the input, and if you read this, it means maybe it's move the character right or left. And so what I did was I created basically an interpreter for the instruction set that they were giving to then
Oh, I
output
see. I see.
output the solution. So it wasn't in an attempt to answer all the questions. It was specific to the question at hand. It was like, oh, okay, I could just take what they're giving, parse it, and then create my own interpreter essentially to spit out the answer. So that
Okay.
was the lens that I'm speaking to right now.
Okay. Well, my first attempt in 2020, I started out with PowerShell, and we got to a puzzle where there was some floating point math involved, and there's a portion of PowerShell's floating point routines that behave in no way like they do in any other language. And it took me forever to figure out a bug in my code because of this. They either they either floored differently or went to the ceiling differently, something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was. So I switched to Python mid competition, but I usually kind of get tired of the puzzles are kind of irritating. The puzzles would be better, in my opinion, if they just said, "Hey, take this list and look for look for digits that are spelled out in English," rather than having to have a Christmas elven story wrapped around it that you've got to read through this stuff, and the stories are kind of more terse than maybe some of these solutions are. But I used PowerShell and Python my first year. In subsequent years, I tried using awk because I that's kind of my go-to for text parsing, and I fared well for a few of the challenges, but the ones that are resource intensive, it just wasn't suited for it, or at least my approaches in awk for some of those, it wasn't suited for it. I tried Python by itself, and I think last year I just tried vanilla C. And I like that a lot. It's just missing a lot of the things you start to take for granted with modern languages, like built-in regular expressions and collections and things like that. So I suppose had I bolstered C with some libraries and gotten used to using them, some hash map libraries and regex libraries and things like that, I probably would try that approach again. But I don't think I'm going to do that this year. So I'll tell you guys. So this year, my approach, I'd like to uh, I have an on and off relationship with the Go programming language, and I use it for a while, and I get fairly conversant in it, and then it sits for long enough that I have difficulty. I there's ramp up time the next time I go to use it. It's not something that sort of sticks with me. So I'm hoping that a new competition can uh, help me sort of get to where I start to think in Go versus thinking in other programming languages. So that's what I'm going to try this year. I've already started going back over the 2023 problems. I've only gotten through problems 1A and B with it, but I think that I'll go through several more and sort of get ready before that first problem drops on December 1st. So what do you guys plan to use this year? I'm assuming you're both participating this year.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a go this year. And Juan had mentioned Prolog, and I had kind of remembered, oh, I played with Prolog a little bit in college. It was a lot of fun. It was
Yeah.
interesting. So I think I'll give Prolog a try this year.
And is that just to learn more about Prolog, Cameron, or do you think it's specifically there's something about it that suits it to these problems?
Oh, I don't know. It may be well suited to these problems. My guess is that it'll be well suited to some of the problems, maybe not all of them. But we'll see. Yeah, my primary motivation is I just want an excuse to play around with it and get a little bit more into it and see what modern Prolog is like and see if it's any different from what I used in college.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this year, as you stated with your on off with Go, I've stepped away from Elixir, and there's a lot of power. I've gone through the material, and I'm really fascinated with it. But it's been long enough that I haven't touched it. That these challenges give me something to focus the learning on versus just kind of going through the material and doing a few things here and there. So I'm planning to start with it, but I'm really not planning to go much further than a week this year, because I'd like to take some things I've shelved from a project perspective and start actively working towards it during this time of the year, during the time of the year that Advent is going on, because that typically is when I can find some more things kind of wind down in general. The demands on my time allow me to do some more learning, the things that, and get kind of deeper into some of these things where I might not have that opportunity throughout the rest of the year, or I should say maybe I don't take that opportunity. So yeah, like as you stated, Jim, get more familiar with the things that have kind of gotten a little rusty. Jump in, but this year I really want to focus on doing some of those problems and then turning it over to some of the things that I want to pull off the shelf from ideas and things that I've been wanting to make progress on.
Okay. What I'm about to ask, I think our philosophies differ on this. When I approach these problems, I'm approaching it I need to like I'm trying to claw my way to the top of the leaderboard, which by the way, I solved the problem very quickly once, so I thought, in relatively you could measure it in it was just a few minutes. It didn't really take that long. And by the time that I got the answer posted, the leaderboard was already loaded with people that I'm not really sure. We've talked about this before about people employing AIs at the time before, AIs were in vogue to do some of these problems. But even solving these problems very quickly, there was really very little reward to getting it done quickly. So I'm curious, do you guys focus on trying to get it done as quickly as you can? Do you try to focus on sort of a academic correctness of code? What is really the approach that you take when you try to solve these puzzles?
Yeah, Cameron, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that's really the great thing about this sort of, this challenge is that there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it. If you want to be the best and really shoot for the top of the leaderboard, you can do something like design your own language that's specifically built for solving these sort of problems. Um, And I think that's probably what it would take to do to get to the top of the leaderboard. Um, but yeah, I mean, for me, it's just I just kind of enjoy the challenge. I put no pressure on myself to try and compete. I don't think I would even consider it really a possibility for myself to be in that league to where I could do it fast enough and get to the top of the leaderboard. Um, I just kind of take my time and don't set you know, don't set any time constraints and just, if one day's challenge takes a few days, that's fine. And, I could just go on to the next one. For me, it's all about just doing the challenge and learning, taking it as an opportunity to learn something new, which I think you're guaranteed to learn something new when you go through these.
Sure.
I fall more on, I think, where Jim, you're on the side of I'll say the competitiveness of it, trying to get an answer sooner. So I wouldn't say it would be correctness of the code. Sometimes it's like, well, one, can I get it to work? So I take the opportunity to do test driven development, write my tests, see if they pass. It's helped me discipline that, because early on in 2015, I wasn't doing that as much as I was still kind of junior. I'd say maybe junior, mid engineer at that time, and really wasn't doing much of it, to be honest. And so it forced me to see the power of it, because again, you mentioned the terseness of the questions, and sometimes I would fall victim to not completely understanding the written words of the question, and so I would answer something differently. And many times what I found was writing the test that aligned with what was there recentered me on the path to actually getting the problem solved. So certainly I was not able to compete with the world that's playing, I guess it's like playing, solving these puzzles. But what I found was it was fun to do it for communities. So I think it's still running, is that you can get a code, and there was one for the closure group that I believe I can still see when I go in. I can select the unique ID for that group of people that have also agreed to be participants in it, and so I can see how I rank against that community. And then you also have the option of using your own private leaderboard. And so for the first, I still have it and folks are still attached to it, but I don't look at it as much here the last few years. As I would compete amongst my fellow Omaha peeps. The folks here, I would look at that, and I think maybe you joined it too, Jim. I gave you a code maybe a few years ago, but again, I haven't looked at it, and it's been less about the competitive here the last few years, just knowing that I have no real desire to actually complete the full year. So that's kind of fallen off here. But yeah, certainly. I also want to get it done sooner, because I had been starting them at, I think, midnight here our time. And so, that wreaks havoc on the next day. So getting them done is
Yep.
early. So the last year I didn't do them at midnight, but before that, the goal was to try to get to sleep as soon as I could. And sometimes you get engaged in these puzzles, and you look at the time, you're like, oh, it's 3 a.m.
Yeah, it's a weird feeling. It's actually 11 p.m. our time here. We're in the central time zone that those
That's right.
drop. And for me, the house is usually silent by then on most nights. So that that passage, the quiet where everything in the house is now asleep but me, and I'm trying to ramp up to, as soon as that drops, to hit it with some vigor. It's hard to do at 11 o'clock at night. And then an obvious thing that happens as part of this is, in addition to learning the languages and stuff like that, the three of us get together on instant messages and discuss the problems. And in the early stages, that's easy enough because we're all starting on problem one, but then someone will be working ahead or doing some things like that. Um, I find that is probably just as much fun as doing the problems themselves, is kicking back and forth some things, seeing perspectives that I hadn't. I've also uh, I started doing this a couple of years ago. Is after the competition's over, and sometimes during, there are GitHub repositories that are just pages that link to solutions in various programming languages. And there are times I'll go through and look and see, well, how did people solve this in, language XYZ? And there's some pretty interesting solutions in there. There's some people out there that are more brute force than I am, I've found. And which is probably hard to believe. So I think that just the friendliness, collaboration, the communication between peers, I think that can be kind of fun in these competitions too. What do you guys think what kind of impact do you think AI, specifically at this point in time with the AI tools that are available, what do you think the impact AI is going to have on this year's competition?
Um, you know, I don't, I don't know.
Do you use it?
For
I mean, have you ever used, Chat GPT or anything like that to help you out in these specifically in these competitions?
No, I've not personally. Um, for me, the goal was how much do I know? How much how can I go? But I will say, I've used Chat GPT to ask it questions about the language itself. Like, what does this mean? Because as I'm learning things about the language, I might take a code snippet and say, please explain what this means. And I found some success there. And many times there'll be a concept that I might not get the first time from the author that I'm reading from, and then it'll be even a different programming language. This happened early on with when I was learning Ruby, and I think if I remember right, they're called them blocks.
Hmm.
And in Python, lambdas. It was that bridge for me, like, oh, that's what's happening here. And so sometimes what I found here, since ChatGPT has been a tool that's available, is I'll paste some code that I don't quite fully understand and ask questions on it and kind of probe it and get better understanding of it. But I don't know that I myself would have it generate any code for me. I still want to enjoy that part of the process.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, same for me. I have used ChatGPT on. I used it last year, but in the way that Juan described it, it's very like because I was using Rust, and if I want to learn how to do some very specific thing in Rust, the syntax, whatever, I'll ask ChatGPT that. But um, I've never tried asking it though. Just the copy and paste the question into ChatGPT, for example. I've never tried that. I'd be curious to see if it would actually work. I think maybe this year after I solve the first one, I'll just copy and paste the problem into ChatGPT and see what it comes up with. See if it would be able to do it.
It'll
That would be pretty impressive.
it'll probably write it in Python, no matter what language you ask it for. That was my early experience. I'd ask it to write things in certain languages, and if it didn't know how to do it, because I'd try to find some obscure old language to just see how it fared. And say sure, and then it'd spit out Python. I'd request some old version of Fortran, and I'd correct, oh yes, and it would apologize, and then it would try again and spit out more Python. So.
Hmm.
To go back to something you said earlier, Jim, about
Mhm.
reviewing other solutions, that is something I do once I've solved something, especially if it was a particular one that I found difficult, and I finally achieve the answer the solution. I'll see how other people solved it, and it reminds me of I think folks still do this, but like code golf. Sometimes when I'm looking at these solutions, and it takes a little bit of time to parse, like what were they? How did
Yeah.
they think of this, or what were they doing? And I didn't know you could do that. So there's a lot of moments where it's like, oh, I didn't know you could do that, or that would have never occurred to me. And then I take these little snippets and these learnings, and they're rolling around in the back of my head, and something will come up, and I'll go, oh. I remember somebody did this thing. And so I think there's not only is the learning of the language and how I solve and pull new input, but sometimes it's completely different from how I would have solved something, and valid and accurate, and just like
Sure.
there are many times there's that, oh wow, like it's humbling. It can be humbling.
Yeah,
Wow.
there's probably a market for a book of curated you know, uh, articles that would talk about the problem, the presented problem, and then do walkthroughs of some of the more interesting solutions like that to see the different approaches. Be nice also to get the. It would be nice if the uh, author. Now the we didn't say his name at the beginning, but the guy that set this whole thing up in 2015, his name is Eric Wassel, Wastl. And I know that he has some assistance in getting things running. He runs things by everybody. The site he runs is an interesting website. It's actually written in Perl, but it looks like a big console screen.
Hmm.
And I'm just curious. It would be nice to get his insight on what the I don't want to say hook, but what the intended difficulty he had baked into each problem was supposed to be, and were there any real solutions that he didn't think of when they were presented as solutions. I think there's a lot of material that if someone had the time and the knowledge to kind of go through several of those competitions, that there's probably something that would be worth reading, at least by all these participants.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
Now the stats here, when he started this in 2015, I was reading this on the Wikipedia entry for Advent of Code. He was planning for a capacity of 70 participants, and he exceeded that shortly. And then within 12 hours of announcing, 4,000 people had joined, nearly causing him a system crash. After 48 hours, there were 15,000 people. And by the end of the 2015 event, the total had risen to 52,000. Um, in 2020, the event saw 50% growth in traffic with over 180,000 participants. This is attributed to COVID. And on December 24th, 2022, Wassel announced that the project had reached 1 million registered users. So there's a lot of competition out there. Um,
Yeah. And they're using all kinds of tools. I've seen folks use Excel. Um, Microsoft Project I saw was used for one.
so they'll find one of those things that's supposed to be Turing complete, like the Rust macro system or something, and try to write it all in Rust macros or something
Yeah,
along those lines for the challenge. Yeah, that would be
yeah.
interesting. Do you think we ought to get a Stray Pointers podcast leaderboard together and see how many people we could get to join that for the 2024 compo?
Great idea.
I think I'll do that. By the time the episode airs here, if you're listening, both my listeners should go to the show notes, and there should be a URL in there or some code so that you can sign up for the Stray Pointers podcast leaderboard this year and see how you fare against Juan and Cameron and myself.
Oh man, now you're throwing the gauntlet down.
Well, it's a
I might have to
competition,
do
man.
more than 5 days.
It's on. So,
Oh,
okay. Anything we didn't cover about the competition or just anything in general you want to talk about?
Well, I think that was a great idea for a book that you had. You probably should have kept that to yourself because that
Sure.
could be a moneymaker.
Well, to be honest with you though, the Eric Wassel, doesn't he copyright he asks that you don't share the puzzles stories, the text from those stories. I used to when I would put my answers out on GitHub, and I should mention that too. We should probably put some GitHub repos in the show notes for this episode so people can kind of track along with us and how we fare, how the three of us fare at least. Um, but I used to include the question like 1A, the
hmm.
sample input, and my solution. And I believe that he's asked that you don't do that. He's okay if you want to share your code, but he'd prefer that they come back to the site to get the questions, to get the inputs and all that sort of thing. So it would have to be done in conjunction with Eric. And I wouldn't have the time to. I enjoy looking through some of these solutions, but I think this would probably take a team of folks to really, yeah, the folks in the Hacker News community seem to be in tune with some of the really good questions and the really good solutions. And it would be kind of cool if, a group of folks there could put something together and, maybe, maybe some sort of an open book format that we could just publish or, I'd pay money for something like that though. And if they're up to 1 million participants, maybe there's a market there.
Yeah. To that point, I was not initially aware of that until we talked last year of the inclusion of the puzzle story, and so
Yeah.
I since actually removed my repository from GitHub just to honor that and maybe go back through and just publish the solution. So my stuff's not out there anymore, just to respect that, as I wasn't aware of it. I just wasn't aware of it. I just kind of dove in, saw the problems, and was putting stuff up. And then here, the last year or so, you and I talked about that, and I was like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that. And so I've removed it just to honor that, and I'll find a way to put the solutions out there without impeding on the desires of the author.
Okay. Well, guys,
You know,
what I'd
that
like, go ahead, Cameron.
I was just going to say that could be a use for ChatGPT. Now, it may be immoral, but you could just ask ChatGPT, "Hey, can you abstract this problem into generic terms? Remove all references to elves, etc. Just give me this like a straightforward problem."
That would that would probably take some of the fury that I reach by 11:15 p.m. each night in these on the just trying to dissect the problem. That would alleviate that. So that might be a good idea. Hey, what I'd like to do, guys, is this has all been a preliminary show about the competition. So what I'd really like is if sometime in December we could get together again and then talk about, after we've gone through a handful of the problems, if we could talk about this year's questions. We don't have to wait till Christmas. We can talk, usually after the first week, I'm pretty well done. So, sometime after that, if we want to get together and talk through some of the problems, the approaches, how effective they were at our goals of, learning a bit more about each of the languages we've chosen and that sort of thing, I'd appreciate it.
It might be
Yeah,
fun to talk about them as we're going through them. Like right after day one. Even if we're not done with it as we're going through it, it might be interesting to talk about it. But
Yeah, I try to keep the podcast clean. I'm not sure they would they, they would like the language I would use even after day one. That is interesting. I think we should talk about that and figure out what we're going to do here, but there should be some subsequent episodes where we talk about these.
yeah, and I think maybe there a question might be, I'm having a hard time myself thinking of one, but is there a question from the years that you participated that stands out as one that you remember? Like, could be programming in anger, or it could be just it was a fun.
Well, last year's very first question, it was the gist of the solution was that you had to basically pair the first digit in a line of text with the last digit that appeared there, fusing it into a two-digit number, and then I think you just had to sum those.
Oh,
And some of the elegant solutions for this used, not mine, used a regular expression to sift out everything that were digits and took the
mm-hmm.
leftmost one and the rightmost one, turned them into an int, and then applied them to a sum function after reading these all in or, doing something along those lines. The B part to that then looked for spelled out digit names like ONETWOTHREE. And in that one, I was using C. And again, I didn't have hash maps available to me unless I plugged in a library. But I had I have written code before where I had used letters in words as base 26 digits to form an index to an array, kind of like a perfect hashing function. And so I noticed the digits 0 through 9, if you look at those spelled out, they are unique by the second digit. The ZEONTWTH uh, FOFISI. I think you guys, you see the patterns there. So I
Mhm.
was able to use that in C, is to take the ASCII value of the letter of those, like E and I, multiply one by 26 and add the second, and use that as an index. I basically came up with my own hash map that didn't involve an elaborate hashing scheme. I just took those first two characters. I as I thought about that, I thought it would work, and it worked on the first try. And so that was one of the more satisfying ones. I guess these corner case or these things that I do, not really corner cases, but there were some problems in awk that required two-dimensional arrays, and the
Mhm.
version of GNU awk that I had at the time didn't really support two-dimensional arrays. So I was using an index with an underscore and another index fused together in a hash map to simulate a two-dimensional array in awk, and I got through a number of the problems that way. I just didn't want to I didn't want to, I felt good after I did it the first time, but every problem after that necessitated it. And I just, okay, this isn't the right approach.
Mhm.
But those were the ones that were memorable for me. What about you
Yeah, that's
guys?
exciting. So an opportunity to come up with probably a unique solution that probably nobody else has done. Nobody else was probably in that situation where they needed to where they needed to come up with a solution like that. So you came up with a unique solution to the problem.
Yeah, nobody, I was the lone C programmer out there.
Right.
Or if I wasn't, they all had, they all had the right libraries paired with their C compiler so they could be a little more exotic with their code.
Right.
What about you, Juan?
I'm thinking about the problem where I mentioned earlier here in our discussion where I used Clojure's Instaparse, where I had created a grammar for the interpreter and to get the answer. And I had to look it up here and on 2015, day 7, it looks like. And it revolves around um, an instruction booklet for how parts connect and wires for like X to Y and kind of mappings. And I just had it brought me back to creating a programming language, and it was something that I had done in college just as an introductory course and learning how that all worked. So it was fun to revisit that and to use that a library within the general purpose programming language to do that. I thought that was really fascinating and interesting. And then I went on, might have done it before then, but I feel like that was a catalyst for me to take on an implementation of the Arnold C programming, essentially used the same library and did some things. So that was real memorable. It was valuable learning for me for myself at that time, and I've added things to that tool belt on my understanding. But I felt like it was an approach that I took. Wasn't the one I initially had, but it was fun to see how I could think about it differently and have that solution. So that one sticks out in my mind. And that was just a general, like that first year, there was so much excitement around it. For me, just like, oh, wow, I get to use these cool things that I'm never really going to maybe do in my day job at the time. And
Yeah,
um,
I'd hope not. If if we find an Arnold C compiler somewhere in our running in our websites, we're in trouble.
oh, there'll be a Jim Lawless one with all your
Right,
idioms that put together.
right, right.
Cameron, did you have anything you wanted to share on that?
No, I don't have any that come to mind. I definitely I remember the feeling. I remember having that satisfying feeling like, oh, I feel really clever for having figured this out, but I don't remember which specific problem or problems that applies to.
what we talked about last year, I feel like the one with the seeds in the garden, that was one that the three of us had quite a bit of conversations on. From we really, it was interesting, the threading approach and where we were the same, where we weren't. So I think about,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that one, if I'm remembering the problem correctly, that one was really the one that made me interested in trying that in Go with Go routines, because some of the approaches I had seen were multi-threaded approaches, and this sort of, if you watch the online conversation, Reddit has a generally each year has a blow by blow of each day where coders can kind of talk through the problems, and the discussions there seem to spiral off in approaches on that one, not just the code to make it threaded, but there were, I believe, certain things they had to do to enable those kinds of threads in their operating systems. Or maybe it might even have been you, Juan, that we were talking about, where we had to, an approach in one of the programming languages, we had to actually do something to enable enough threading to get the throughput that really solve the problem quickly. But yeah, I am remembering that now, and that was interesting, because it certainly, for me, it sort of guided me to do a little more research, and it also ended up getting me interested in the Julia programming language, which I almost decided to try to use for this year's competition. I'm not near the level I should be, and I don't want to use the advent of code for vehicle for that at this time. But yeah,
yeah.
that was an interesting problem.
If I remember correctly, as we talked through, yeah, the spawning of threads, and we talked about what the optimal was versus how many cores we had on our machines and how that played into
Yep.
where we were comparing like 10 cores versus maybe 8 cores, and uh, where putting too much, putting more threads wasn't helpful. There was some optimal balance that we were talking through. I do recall that.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get there with another problem like that this year. If I recall, last year they went from relatively easy to, boy, this is tough pretty quickly, like by the third problem.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. What I was getting to, I went off track there. The solution that we thought was really interesting was to start from the end. We were starting, if we were to say top down, where we followed the instructions, where as we were talking and we solved it ultimately, and then went back and kind of saw what other folks had done, and we saw like starting from the end and working back decreased the compute and complexity significantly. And it was, again, it was one of those moments where we're like, oh wow, like it had not occurred to me. And it's just one of those checks on where my bias lie when I'm solving something, and
Yep.
maybe um, when we look at these problems, approaching them differently. Because one of the things that I'm forced to do is know that part B, as they label it, or I think that's how I label it, day whatever, part A and part B. Part B usually throws a big enough wrench if I hadn't really, if I was rushing the solution. I would say if I was like, oh yeah, I got this thing, and then B comes along and I'm like, wow, all right, I've got some refactoring to do here, and I need to think about the problem differently. So those moments they're fun. They're just little Easter eggs when for me I'm like, oh wow, this completely changed, and I didn't know they were going to go this route. I didn't know the problem was going to make this turn, and so I do enjoy that surprise of what's B going to bring.
Okay. Well, guys, thanks for being on the show today. We're going to get together again soon, and we'll see how we've fared in the next episode. Thanks
All
again.
right,
Looking
thank
forward
you.
to it.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Let's do this again soon. Take care.